how long have these been in the studio now?
Well, they've been in the studio long enough for me to not, take a position with them. And so far my position is I like them. I could make up reasons why I like them, but probably the main reason is I can't explain them. There are, you get to a point where you put something in plaster and there are certain stable values about what one does with a plaster, and I probably entered into painting them because I wanted to do something about painting. And there have been times in the past when I didn't feel I could paint on a flat surface, and I started painting on my sculptures. Because for me, really, sculpture is very illusionistic. It's illusionistic in my mind to begin with because of the image that I'm after, and it's illusionistic visually if I'm looking at it with any kind of sensibility. My sensibility. I know that thought gets involved with looking at sculpture too, but I don't evaluate. Of course we do. You and I, we evaluate our sculpture, formally also. But we also evaluate it for what's in it. And I think the most important thing is when we can't quite know what it is at the end. That's when it strikes a chord.
Well, I have a question. Is this a figure or is it a sculpture?
It's more figure than sculpture. If I start to think of sculpture, it gets in the way of the personality of the figure. It takes it away. It takes it out. I don't have a pure form for the image of the figure that I'm after.
But if it's a figure, and this, what does that mean if a figure ends like this here?
Well, it's problematic because it means that it's an antique. It means that it's damaged, that it goes back to an older figure that has been damaged by time. But of course there are some pretty good examples of artists who have cut it off. It seems a little bit false to me personally to cut something off intentionally. The reason I did it is I didn't like the arm. So what happens occasionally with me is, and I usually fight against the tendency to correct it once it's in plaster. But there are times when I go ahead and cast in plaster, and it really would be much better if it were still in the clay.
So this wasn't like this in clay?
No, and it wasn't like this when it was first exhibited either. So in a way, I started working on it again. I think there have been examples of people who work on the bronzes, but also it was impulsive. Almost all of it's based on instinct, The kind of damage that I like left in the sculpture, I don't like to do it intentionally, but that's part of leaving the thing while it's still being made, is that it doesn't seem complete or whole. Then if you fake it, it's not so good. You can't really do that. Often when I'm working on a sculpture, many of the most interesting moments are where things are hurt by the process of the sculpture changing. But you can't really let that take over.
And how do you end up with these colors, this blue and this?
I was trying to put color in some paintings, finally. And I I almost like had a hunger for red, but of course you need something to go with it. I mean, you don't if you're a monochrome painter, but I thought blue, and it could have been green. Now I like a certain kind of acid green with it, but I had a hunger for red, and I don't know what it means, except that it's not so naturalistic, and maybe there's something to that it's not naturalistic. But when you're taking the color away, in a way you're doing this a little bit like painting. Here's a warm, here's a cool, warm, and then the light coming through, just the way you would do it in oil or watercolors. In oil, this would be the white lead underneath and letting the volume, so pushing the volume even further forward. But then, of course, you're using a red, so that comes forward. Then where, of course, you put the blue in, if it holds with the, it's just like a painting, if it holds with the white or the red, it's okay. If it doesn't, it gets like this, then it just becomes a huge effect. Here, this would be very similar to a red and black chalk drawing, and that's probably exactly why I do it that way, because I have made that kind of drawing. When it gets red here, of course, that doesn't make any sense at all in those terms. This is something else. So, these are all made from a certain group of drawings that I discovered. I knew I had them, I found them in a portfolio. So I take out that drawing, I redraw it, then I draw it again on this, and each time it's different, but these are angels. Not why they're angels, I don't know, I always liked angels. But they're not quite the pretty angels, maybe they're the bad group of angels. You know?
And the green, the cerulean really activates.
It goes well against the
red.
red chalk. You know, it sets itself perfectly against the chalk.
Yeah. These look so right now, even though they also look like they're related to Rodin's watercolors.
They are related to it. You know, I've had this postcard here for 10 or 12 years, and I never really cared for it that much. I don't know why I put it there. It's one of those things, you know. I can't say I was directly inspired by that, but it's been here for a long time.
It's hard to know what causes what, isn't it?
Yeah. So
I don't think we can now.
I think partly what interests me is to have the drawing left. It's you know, the drawing is...
The combination is beautiful.
I like that combination.
Interesting.
Yeah. Here I went in over again. I don't care for that so much. It seems so superimposed. And this one seems to have lost a lot of its integrity as a body, and it's become more of an abstraction, which starts to become interesting also.
I think these are really interesting.
I like them. I feel they're a summation of many things that I have done. At one time, I couldn't paint for a while. I mean, I was trying to paint, I couldn't paint. And so what I started working with were colored pencils. And I put a certain kind of pumice in the medium so that it would grip the colored pencil. And then I would go over it lightly with acrylic. So it was similar to this. Now, I didn't destroy all of them because fortunately 3 people bought 3 of them, and so they're still alive. Otherwise, if they were here, I painted over them. I like this one the best.
Which one?
This one.
Mm. They look like they're asking for color, though.
Yes. Oh, really? I'm glad you said that because
Don't you think so?
I'd love to color them.
So then these become a starting place instead of an ending place.
They become a place for another another sculpture, which is basically the kind of sculpture I do. I remember in Italy once I was having some bronzes made, some very small ones over there. The man said, like, he's giving me a lesson. He said, well, Bruce, I think I made a question about the waxes or something, or about the mold. I said, this seems strange to me. Now we have a plaster, then we get a wax, and I work on each one, and then we cast them in bronze. He said, well, each phase is a new sculpture. They don't really have a lot of turning around. They're rarely very frontal, and then you go very quickly past the side to the back. And these new ones are that way too. You can see I flattened them out quite a bit.
Very much.
I
They're
used
very
to
different.
work with a spiral. Now I think of the box, pretty much go from front to back. And then when you look at them from the side, they're getting quite narrow. So they're much more illusionistic in a way. They're much more painterly. And that's interesting, because that's kind of the way I look at things more anyway, unlike a genuine sculptor.
Can you tell me a little more about the arm, the feet, and the chopping and the? How did this come about?
Oh, because I put the piece back again. I think there are two pieces. This was put back on. This comes off still. In other words, these are where I cut them. And now I'm just wanting to see what they would look like if they go back on. And I think the fact that they're different makes it okay for me. I tried putting the feet back on that one, but it didn't work. I think most sculptors find sculpture arms very problematic on a figure. Yet it's terribly false to take the arms away. To me, I can read this as space. Now, Medardo worked with that idea a lot. He did it just the opposite of Giacometti. He added space. Now, I learned about, or I heard about form and sculpture from people who were of a certain age group. We call them formalists. They were very concerned with form, not very much with content at all. And not so much sculpture as illusion. Finally, it became, they were more concerned about sculpture as an idea, as a historical concept, rather than an illusion that was evocative of something. So I would say that if this can help make this evocative without becoming too much like Gustave Moreau, say, it's for the good. People divide themselves up, and I'm not a philosopher for sure, but I am metaphysical in my point of view. A lot of people, this country, Britain, other countries, many other countries, are empirical. If you ask them what philosopher they like, they say Whitehead. If you ask me what philosopher I like, I say Hegel. And metaphysics and empiricism don't quite mix as far as I know. I'm not a philosopher, but I notice it just in art schools and amongst artists that we divide up. I think formalists are empiricists. There are some people who are, more aloof. They're not practicing the art itself, and they can move from one thing to another quite easily. But I'm definitely in the metaphysical camp. What you really see is not there. And I think hardening it off to form, to what we were taught to think of as art in our time, where form divided itself away from meaning. You can't say this about a Greek figure, for instance, they're the same. But in our time they became different, and in my time particularly. Form for its own sake, art for its own sake. I had a hunger for color at that time when I painted these. But now I want to paint everything. I want to paint the bronzes.